In the heart of North Dakota, where endless plains meet dense forests, Emily Carter's life was about to change forever. But for now, she was still in the calm before the storm. On that icy January morning, Emily stood by the window of their cozy farmhouse, watching as snowflakes drifted lazily from a pale gray sky. Their border collie, Scout, scratched at the door, eager to romp in the yard. Emily smiled faintly. Emily was 25, with honey blonde hair that fell just past her shoulders, fair skin, and green eyes that always seemed to flicker with quiet determination. 8 months pregnant, she moved a little slower these days, one hand resting on her swollen belly, as if instinctively protecting the life inside. Her husband, Daniel, adored her for it. "Daniel," she called softly, "we need more milk." "I didn't know we'd go through it so fast," Emily chuckled, rubbing her belly. "Babies craving cereal every morning." Daniel, 30, with dark brown hair and sun-kissed skin from years working on the farm, emerged from the back room, a teasing grin on his face. "Didn't we just stock up last week?" Emily shook her head. "No, I'll go. I need to stretch my legs." Daniel leaned in, kissing her forehead. "All right, I'll head into town after chores." He frowned. The roads." "I'll be fine," she assured him, tugging on her thick winter coat. "It's just 10 miles." As Emily drove into town, the landscape blurred into white, the narrow road, lined with towering pine trees. She hummed softly to the radio, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on her belly, as if to reassure herself that everything was fine. Outside, the world was already shifting. The weather forecast had mentioned light snow, but no one in town paid it much attention. After all, winter here was always rough, and the locals knew how to handle it. By noon, she was checking items off her list. At the small general store, milk, bread, a few canned goods. She chatted briefly with Mrs. Thompson, the elderly shopkeeper, and then hurried back to the car. Halfway home, the first wave of doubt swept over her. Visibility was dropping. The road, once just lightly dusted, was now vanishing under a thickening blanket of white. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, heart thudding. The forest around her pressed close, dark shapes, looming through the swirling snow. What Emily didn't see, as she loaded the groceries into her SUV, was the shift in the sky. The soft snow had thickened, the clouds darkening, the wind beginning to howl through the trees like a distant warning. But then fate intervened. "Almost home," she whispered. Scout would be waiting at the door. Daniel would tease her for being stubborn. She'd laugh, promise to take it easy. A sudden gust of wind barreled down the road, hurling snow into the air. It slammed into Emily's car like a wave. The windshield turned white, the tires skidded, and she felt the jolt as the SUV crunched into a snowbank, the engine sputtering. Emily's hands trembled as she fumbled for her phone. No signal. She tried rocking the car, shifting from reverse to drive, but the tires only spun, buried deeper. Panic coiled in her chest. She was miles from home, trapped on a forest road, and the storm was growing worse by the minute. She closed her eyes, drawing a shaky breath. "Think, Emily. Gas gauge. Nearly empty." And then, like a cruel whisper from nature itself, the first sharp pain clenched in her abdomen. Emily gasped, doubling over slightly, one hand clenching the steering wheel, the other braced on her belly. No, no, not now. Outside, temperature dropping fast. For a moment she sat frozen, watching her own breath fog up the glass. Then, with the last of her resolve, Emily pulled on every extra layer she could find, scarf, hat, gloves, stuffed a blanket into her backpack, and pushed the car door open against the wind. The world outside was a wall of white. Snow lashed at her face as she stumbled forward, boots sinking ankle-deep, then knee-deep. She set her eyes on the road, on the direction back toward town. The contractions were early, but unmistakable. Step by step, Emily pushed on, the cold gnawing through her clothes. Each contraction came sharper, stealing her breath, forcing her to stop, to lean on trees for support. Her teeth chattered, tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, half from pain, half from sheer terror. "Please," she whispered to the storm. "Please let me make it." But the storm didn't care. The storm howled on. Her last thought, before blacking out, was not of fear, or regret, or even herself. Hours slipped away in a blur of pain and snow. Emily no longer knew how far she'd come. The road had vanished. The forest loomed around her, trees swaying under the weight of ice. With a final, desperate effort, she stumbled toward a wide pine, the snow shallower at its base, and collapsed. The world tilted, darkened, spun into silence. It was of the tiny heartbeat she had carried so carefully for 8 months. Emily drifted in and out of consciousness, her body trembling, her mind floating somewhere between pain and dreams. "Hold on," she whispered, barely moving her lips. "Please, hold on." And then, nothing. In her half-awareness, she saw flickers of light, the soft glow of her childhood bedroom, the sun on her mother's face, the warm touch of Daniel's hand as they painted the nursery. But each time she reached for these images, the cold dragged her back. Her eyelids fluttered, heavy as stone. Low, rumbling. Somewhere in the distance, a sound pierced the storm. Emily's eyes cracked open. Snowflakes clung to her eyelashes. The world around her, nothing but swirling white. But the sound came again. Closer now. Not just one growl, but many. Shuffling. Heavy paws crunching through snow. Panic shot through her like a surge of electricity. A growl. The figures emerged from the blizzard like ghosts. First one, then another, then a whole shadowy line. 9 wolves in total. Their thick winter coats, dusted with snow, their eyes glinting gold in the fading light. Her heart thundered in her chest. She tried to move, but her limbs were heavy, her muscles stiff from cold and exhaustion. She barely managed to lift her head before collapsing back against the tree trunk, breath hitching in shallow gasps. Wolves, the largest among them a massive grey wolf, moved with a slow, deliberate gait, its breath steaming in the air. A she-wolf, smaller and lighter in color, hovered close behind. Emily's throat tightened. She wanted to scream, but no sound came. This is how it ends, she thought, numbly. Not the storm, not the cold. The wolves. The wolves didn't lunge. They didn't bare their teeth or circle like predators, scenting an easy kill. But then something unexpected happened. Instead, they sat. One by one, they lowered their bodies into the snow, forming a loose, protective ring around her. Their eyes watched, their ears flicked, but none moved closer. The she-wolf inched forward cautiously, nose twitching, then eased herself down just a few feet from Emily's collapsed form. Emily let out a shaky breath, tears slipping down her chilled cheeks. Confusion warred with fear inside her. Why weren't they attacking? Why weren't they running? The grey wolf shifted. His massive body turned slightly, positioning himself to block the wind that howled through the trees. The other wolves followed his lead, closing ranks, their bodies forming a living wall against the blizzard. Her body shivered violently, another contraction rippling through her abdomen. She squeezed her eyes shut, a low whimper escaping her lips. Time unraveled. Somewhere deep inside, the primal part of her recognized this as help, not harm. Emily drifted again, slipping beneath waves of pain and cold. But through the haze, a faint awareness tugged at her, the warmth of fur against her skin, the soft press of something nuzzling her arm. The she-wolf had moved closer, her eyes calm, her movements careful. Emily felt the brush of a damp nose, the tickle of warm breath against her face. Her hands fumbled weakly toward her belly. The pain was sharper now, relentless. Emily cried out, her voice thin and broken against the storm. She didn't remember much after that, only flashes. The pain, blinding, consuming. The grey wolf standing watch, his golden eyes unblinking. The she-wolf, pressing close, the sudden, desperate push that seemed to tear her world apart. A sound, and then a sharp, high-pitched cry that pierced the cold like sunlight through clouds. She turned her head, struggling to focus. There, nestled against her chest, wrapped in the warmth of borrowed fur, was her baby, tiny, wrinkled, pink-skinned, his chest rising and falling in thin, shaky breaths. Emily's eyes snapped open. The she-wolf nosed gently at the baby, her tongue rasping across the child's forehead with surprising tenderness. Emily's gaze flicked downward in shock. The umbilical cord, severed, cleaned. Her breath hitched. "They helped me." Tears blurred Emily's vision. She reached out, cradling him close, feeling the tiny heartbeat, the miracle of it. Outside the circle, the storm raged on. Her fingers brushed over her son's downy hair. She couldn't understand it, couldn't explain it, but in that moment, she didn't need to. The grey wolf lifted his head, scanning the tree line, ears alert. His posture remained calm but ready, as if he understood this moment was not yet over, that something else was coming. Daniel Carter stood at the window, fists clenched, watching the storm swallow the last traces of daylight. Snow lashed against the farmhouse, wind howling like a wounded animal. Scout, their border collie, paced anxiously by the door, whining softly. "She should have been back by now," Daniel muttered, more to himself than anyone. And miles away, in the warmth of the farmhouse, Daniel paced the floor, panic clawing at his chest. Grabbing his phone, Daniel dialed Emily's number for the 10th time, straight to voicemail. He was 30, with dark brown hair, short cropped, his tanned skin a contrast against the pale worry in his face. His rugged frame looked tense, like a coiled spring ready to snap. His chest tightened. He glanced at the clock, 7:30 p.m. She had left for town at noon. 10 miles. She should have been home hours ago. His neighbor Mike pulled up in his old red pickup, headlights dim behind the veil of snow. "Daniel," Mike shouted over the wind. "Any word?" With a sharp whistle, he called Scout, pulled on his heavy work jacket, gloves and boots, and stepped outside into the biting cold. The wind slammed into him like a wall. For a moment he stood there, trying to think, trying to steady the panic clawing at his throat. "Nothing," Daniel yelled back. "I'm going after her." Mike's brow furrowed beneath his wool cap. "The roads are a mess. You'll need the heavy duty." Together they trudged back inside, where Daniel fumbled with the keys to the old farm truck, a hulking beast of a vehicle built for the worst winters. Mike called 2 more neighbors, and within half an hour, 3 men and a dog were on their way into the blizzard. The forest road was almost unrecognizable. Snowdrifts swallowed the ditches, trees leaned under the weight of ice, and the narrow track had nearly disappeared. Daniel gripped the wheel, his knuckles white. Scout wedged on the seat beside him, ears perked. "She's out here," Daniel murmured, under his breath. "She's out here. Please, Emma, hold on." Far ahead, in the heart of the forest, the wolves stirred. Every few minutes, they stopped to search on foot, shouting her name into the roaring dark. But the storm swallowed their voices whole. The massive grey alpha lifted his head, ears flicking toward the distant sound of engines. The smaller she-wolf remained close to Emily, licking gently at the newborn who now whimpered softly in the crook of his mother's arm. Emily's eyes fluttered open, her breath shallow, but she could sense something, a vibration under the snow, a faint rumble of tires. The wolves moved like a single living organism. They rose from the snow in one smooth wave, their thick coats bristling against the cold. The grey alpha stepped forward, his paws silent on the frozen ground, his golden eyes watching the dark ribbon of road through the trees. Daniel's headlights sliced weakly through the whiteout. His heart pounded in his chest as he spotted something, a shape buried in snow. She shifted, weakly cradling the baby closer, her lips cracked and whispering a soundless prayer. "There," he shouted, slamming the truck into park. Daniel felt his throat close. They leaped out, boots sinking into deep drifts, Scout bounding ahead with a sharp bark. The men reached the SUV, nearly buried, the windshield frosted over, the driver's side door ajar. "She's not here," he rasped, panic surging. She left on foot. They fanned out, flashlights cutting thin beams into the storm. Daniel's voice cracked as he called Emily's name again and again, his words swept away by the wind. Mike laid a hand on his shoulder. "We'll split up. Follow the tree line." 9 shadows, their outlines barely visible, slipping between the trees like phantoms. Daniel froze mid-step, his breath hitching in his throat. In the distance, the wolves appeared. "Mike!" he called, voice tight with dread. "Over here." The other men rushed over, guns raised, the cold metal glinting under the faint light. But Daniel squinted through the storm. Something was wrong. "Wolves," Mike muttered. "Get back to the truck." They stood, watching, waiting. The massive grey Alpha took a step forward, then paused, glancing back at something hidden in the snow. The wolves weren't attacking. They weren't even advancing. A flash of color, and Daniel saw it. A shape. Daniel ran. The snow clung to his legs. The wind tore at his face. But nothing mattered. He stumbled toward the wolves, tears freezing on his cheeks. The men shouted behind him, guns still raised. But Daniel didn't stop. "Emily." As he drew closer, the wolves parted, slow and deliberate, their eyes fixed on him, but their bodies calm. And there she was, Emily crumpled at the base of a pine tree, their baby tucked against her chest, a thin cry escaping his tiny lips. "Emily!" Daniel fell to his knees, scooping them both into his arms, his voice raw. "Oh God, Emily, I'm here." Her eyes fluttered open. A faint smile touched her chapped lips. "They saved us," she murmured, voice barely a breath. As the truck rumbled away, Emily bundled in blankets, baby in her arms. Daniel glanced back. Daniel pressed his forehead to hers, rocking them both, as the wolves watched in silence. The wolves stood at the edge of the trees, their outlines sharp against the white. The massive grey Alpha met Daniel's gaze for a long heartbeat, then turned, disappearing into the wild. The hospital lights were almost blinding after the storm. Emily lay in the narrow bed, her body swaddled in warm blankets, a faint blush returning to her fair skin. Her honey-blonde hair was damp and tangled, sticking to her cheeks. But her green eyes were open now, fluttering weakly as she looked down at the tiny bundle cradled against her chest. Noah, her son. His tiny face was scrunched, lips pursed in a sleepy pout, his skin soft and pink against the hospital-issued blanket. A weak cry escaped him as the nurse checked his vitals, but Emily shushed him softly, brushing her fingers over his downy hair. Beside her, Daniel sat with his head in his hands, his dark brown hair mussed, his sun-kissed skin pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. His heavy winter jacket was tossed over the chair, gloves resting in his lap. He lifted his head when Emily stirred, his brown eyes filled with exhaustion and quiet awe. Emily smiled faintly, voice hoarse. "We're okay because of them." "You're both okay," Daniel whispered, leaning in to kiss her forehead. "Thank God. They helped," she murmured, a tear slipping down her cheek. "They delivered Noah. Daniel, they kept us alive." Daniel hesitated, his brow furrowed as he squeezed her hand. "You kept saying that, Em. They saved us." He exhaled slowly. "The wolves?" Emily closed her eyes, the memory washing over her like a tide. The grey Alpha, the gentle she-wolf, the warmth of their bodies against hers, the protective ring they formed. Her throat tightened. Doctors, nurses, even local reporters circled the room, their voices hushed, their eyes darting to Emily and Noah with a mix of concern and disbelief. Daniel's breath caught. He looked away, jaw tightening. By the next morning, the news had spread. A wildlife expert was called in. a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a clipboard who shook her head repeatedly as Emily spoke. "We can't explain how you survived the night," one doctor confessed. "The hypothermia should have been fatal, and yet your body temperature was stabilized. The baby's cord was cleanly severed. No signs of infection. Wolves are predators," she said quietly. "Their instinct is to hunt, not help." Meanwhile, outside the hospital, the small town buzzed. But Emily knew better. Neighbors gathered at the local diner, voices rising and falling over cups of steaming coffee. The sheriff paced outside, puffing nervously on a cigarette, trying to balance the rumors with reason. "I heard it was 9 of 'em," one man said, shaking his head. "My sister swears Daniel saw him standing watch when they got to her." "Promise me something," she whispered. Emily's voice pulled him back. Back inside, Daniel sat by the window, staring out at the snow-draped world beyond. He turned, brow creasing. "Anything. When we're strong enough," she said softly. "I want to go back to where it happened." Daniel's eyes darkened. I need to thank them." He knelt beside her, brushing a hand over Noah's tiny fingers. "All right," he murmured, pressing his forehead to hers. "When you're ready, we'll go." For the next several days, the hospital room became their world. Emily's strength returned in small measures. She sat up. She held Noah more easily. She laughed quietly when Daniel fumbled with the baby bottles. The nurses adored the little family, and behind the smiles and reassurances, they whispered about the miracle everyone was trying to understand. It didn't feel like a dream. At night, when the ward was quiet, Emily would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, the memory of the wolves vivid in her mind. She remembered the way the she-wolf had nuzzled Noah, the warmth of the pack's bodies, the way the grey alpha had locked eyes with her, calm and knowing. It felt like something ancient, something that defied the rules they all thought they understood. A week later, the doctor came in with a soft smile. "You're free to go home." Emily exhaled, relief and anticipation flooding her, as Daniel helped her into her coat, a thick navy winter jacket, scarf, gloves. She cradled Noah close, wrapping him in a knit blanket. Her honey-blonde hair was brushed now, falling loosely around her shoulders, and her fair cheeks were flushed with new strength. For a moment, Emily stood still on the hospital steps, looking out toward the distant tree line. They stepped out into the sunlight. The cold sharp but clean, the storm long past. "We'll come back soon," she thought. It was early spring when Emily and Daniel made good on their promise. "I promise." Emily sat in the passenger seat, her fair skin warmed by the pale sunlight streaming through the window. Her honey-blonde hair, freshly brushed, fell softly over her shoulders. She wore a dark green coat, a knitted scarf tucked at her neck, and held Noah, now almost 3 months old, snug in a padded carrier across her chest. The baby's tiny fists peeked from the edges of the blanket, his soft pink face calm in sleep. Daniel, at the wheel, was his usual steady presence. Dark brown hair tousled, sun-kissed skin marked by long days working the land, his strong hands gripping the wheel. He glanced at Emily, a flicker of concern crossing his brow. The snow had begun to melt, trickling in thin silver streams down the hillsides, and the trees were shedding their icy coats. The forest road was still rough, muddy in places, but Daniel's heavy-duty truck handled it without trouble. Emily gave a small, firm nod. "I have to, just once." "Are you sure about this?" he murmured. They parked where the snow thinned into patches of wet earth and grass, where the forest loomed tall and hushed. Stepping out, Emily inhaled deeply. The air was sharp and clean, full of pine and damp soil. For a moment, she simply stood there, cradling Noah, eyes drifting across the trees. They moved carefully along the narrow trail, Daniel's arm lightly at Emily's back. Scout, their loyal border collie, trotted ahead, nose to the ground, tail wagging cautiously. The dog paused often, ears pricking, as if sensing they were not alone. Memories rippled through her. The blizzard, the wolves, the impossible warmth that had saved her life. She could almost feel it in the air still, lingering like a whispered promise. Emily paused beneath the wide pine where she had fallen that night. She reached out, brushing her fingertips along the rough bark, a shiver passing through her. Then Emily spoke softly, her voice trembling. "This is where it happened," she whispered. Daniel's arms came around her, steady and warm. They stood in silence for a long moment, listening to the rustle of wind through the branches. There, in the shadows. "Thank you." The word barely left her lips before Scout gave a sharp, excited bark. Emily and Daniel turned sharply, hearts leaping, as the dog darted toward the tree line. A flicker of movement, a pair of eyes glowing amber in the dim light. The massive grey wolf. He emerged slowly. The pack leader, his thick coat still streaked with silver, his posture calm and regal. Behind him, faint shapes shifted, the outlines of the rest of the pack, the she-wolf among them. She took a slow, cautious step forward, cradling Noah close, her green eyes wide and shimmering with unshed tears. Emily felt her breath catch. Her pulse thundered in her ears. The grey wolf watched her, head tilted slightly, as if recognizing her. There was no sound, no growl, no bark, only the soft whisper of the wind and the quiet beat of hearts across the distance. For one long, endless moment, human and wild locked eyes. Daniel stood close, one hand protectively on her shoulder, his own eyes wide with wonder. Emily offered a trembling smile. "Thank you," she repeated, her voice breaking. Emily remained frozen in place, tears slipping down her cheeks, Noah murmuring softly against her chest. Then, as if on some silent signal, the grey wolf gave a slow, solemn nod. He turned, melting back into the trees, the rest of the pack flowing behind him like shadows on water. Daniel squeezed her shoulder, voice rough. "You okay?" Emily let out a shaky breath, smiling through the tears. "Yeah," she whispered. "More than okay." Back at the farmhouse, Emily stood on the porch with Noah in her arms, watching the horizon fade into dusk. She pressed a gentle kiss to her baby's head. On the way home, the sun broke through the clouds, casting warm gold over the melting snow and wet earth. The world felt different somehow, bigger, deeper, filled with quiet, unknowable grace. "Someday," she murmured to him, "I'll tell you the story about the night the wild saved us." Word traveled faster than the spring thaw. Scout sat at her feet, ears flicking toward the distant forest, and for a moment Emily could almost feel those golden eyes still watching from the trees. By the time Emily and Daniel returned to town, the story of the wolves had spread like wildfire. At the general store, whispers stirred as they walked in. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly shopkeeper, clutched her chest as Emily approached, her grey eyes wide. Emily smiled softly, her fair skin still pale, but glowing with quiet strength, honey blonde hair pulled into a loose braid. She adjusted Noah in the carrier strapped to her chest, the baby now plump and rosy, blue eyes blinking sleepily at the world. "Emily, dear, is it true?" she breathed. "Did the wolves really?" Daniel, standing beside Emily, his dark brown hair tousled, sun-kissed skin roughened from days of work on the farm, offered a respectful nod. But behind his steady gaze, a flicker of unease stirred. "They saved us, Mrs. Thompson," Emily murmured. "That's the truth." The old woman's lips trembled into a shaky smile. "Miracles do walk this earth, child. Because not all whispers were kind. I heard it was 9 wolves. 9. At the diner, a small crowd had gathered by the window, coffee mugs in hand, voices hushed and sharp. Could have torn her apart. And the baby. Sheriff Harris leaned on the counter, rubbing the stubble on his weathered chin. Mid-50s, square-shouldered, grey at the temples. He had known Emily since she was a girl. Now, his dark eyes flicked toward her, with something like worry. "They're unpredictable. You know, wild animals don't belong near people." "Emily," he said slowly, "you sure you want to tell that story around here? Folks are on edge." Daniel gently squeezed her hand, his brown eyes shadowed with concern. We should head home, Emily tilted her head, voice calm but firm. Sheriff, I'm not making them heroes. I'm just telling the truth. That night, at the farmhouse, Emily sat by the window as dusk settled. The sky streaked in purple and gold. Noah slept soundly in his crib. Scout curled up on the rug at her feet, his black and white fur rising and falling with each slow breath. You're thinking about them again, he murmured. Daniel came to her side, setting a steaming mug of tea on the windowsill. Emily nodded, her green eyes fixed on the tree line beyond the fields. I can't help it. I owe them everything, Daniel. He sat beside her, his arm curling around her shoulders. I know, but outside, the world was changing. A week later, 2 wildlife officers arrived. They pulled up in a white government truck, badges pinned to their brown jackets, radios crackling at their hips. Emily stepped onto the porch, cradling Noah Daniel at her side. The taller officer, a man in his 40s with salt and pepper hair and sharp blue eyes, offered a polite but tight-lipped smile. Mrs. Carter, Mr. Carter, we heard the reports about the wolf pack. Emily's heart tightened. Yes, she said quietly. They saved my life. The officer shifted his weight. That's remarkable. But we are concerned. Wolves this close to town. It's unusual. We need to assess whether they pose a threat. Daniel's shoulders stiffened. They're not a threat. I understand, the officer said, his voice measured. But if they're getting comfortable around humans, it could lead to dangerous situations. The officer exchanged a glance with his partner. We'll be conducting some monitoring. For now, stay clear of the woods. Emily felt her pulse quicken. They didn't come looking for us. We were in their territory. She saw the grey alpha standing tall under the moonlight, his silver coat gleaming, his golden eyes watching her with quiet wisdom. She heard the soft rustle of paws, the low murmur of the wind through pine branches, and the delicate heartbeat of her son against her chest. That night, she dreamed of the forest. Emily watched them drive away, a knot twisting in her chest. In the days that followed, Emily noticed subtle signs. When she woke, her pillow was damp with tears. Scout barking at the back door late at night, his ears pricked toward the woods. Emily felt it deep in her bones. The wolves were still near. Faint tracks in the mud near the edge of their fields, large round paw prints she knew all too well, a single wolf's cry in the distance, long and low, like a farewell or a warning. She walked the property during the quiet hours, Noah bundled snug against her chest, Scout trailing at her heels, Daniel worried, urging her to stay close, but Emily felt no fear, only a fierce, aching gratitude. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Emily stood at the edge of the forest, her dark green coat wrapped tightly around her, Noah squirming softly in his carrier. From the trees, a shape emerged, smaller, slender, her pale grey coat shimmering like frost. She paused at the tree line, amber eyes meeting Emily's, ears flicking forward. The she-wolf. Emily's breath caught. Softly, under her breath, Emily whispered, "Thank you." For a moment, time folded in on itself. The memory of that night, the miracle of survival, the bond forged between species. The she-wolf tipped her head once, then turned, vanishing into the trees without a sound. Emily stood for a long time after. Noah nestled close, the last rays of sunlight casting a warm glow over mother and child. By late spring, the town of Willow Creek was buzzing with tension. Emily could feel it every time she stepped into town. At the grocery store, eyes followed her. At the diner, conversations quieted when she entered. Some people smiled, offered kind words, even touched Noah's tiny fingers, and whispered, "Miracle, baby," but others looked away, their faces tight with unease. "I'm telling you, wolves that close to homes. It's only a matter of time," one farmer muttered at the gas station. "She's lucky to be alive, but luck runs out." Sheriff Harris was doing his best to calm people down, But Emily saw the worry in his eyes when they crossed paths at the post office. He pulled her aside, voice low. "Emily," he murmured, "I believe you. I do. But folks are nervous. Livestock's gone missing up in the hills. Chickens. Sheep. Nobody's blaming you, but they're talking." Harris nodded slowly, his grey brows knit together. "Just stay safe, all right?" "I understand, Sheriff," she said quietly. "But they saved my life. They saved my son." Emily's fair skin paled slightly, her green eyes troubled. She tucked Noah closer into the carrier on her chest, his soft cheeks flushed pink, his tiny fists clenching as he dozed. Her honey-blonde hair, braided neatly down her shoulder, caught in the light as she lifted her chin. Daniel could feel it too. At home, the air felt heavier. He worked longer hours, mending fences, checking on their cattle, watching Scout patrol the edges of the property with nervous energy. His dark brown hair was often mussed from running his hands through it, his sun-kissed skin marked with lines of worry. He sat with Emily at night, rubbing her shoulders, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. He kissed the top of her head, holding her close. "You're too good, Em." Emily reached for his hand, fingers lacing through his. "They're afraid, that's all." "I don't like this," he confessed one evening, gazing out at the darkened fields. "I don't like how people are turning this into a problem." That weekend, the wildlife officers returned. "We've been tracking the pack," the taller officer said, his sharp blue eyes somber. "They've been sighted closer to residential areas. We're considering a relocation effort." Their truck crunched up the driveway in the pale morning light, radios crackling, boots heavy on the porch steps. Emily stepped outside, her dark green coat pulled snug around her, Noah bundled against her chest, Scout wagging anxiously at her side. Emily's breath caught. Relocation. The words hit like a punch to the chest. His partner, a younger officer with sandy hair and a stiff expression, cleared his throat. "If necessary, lethal measures aren't off the table." Emily took a shaky breath. "They saved us. Please, don't treat them like a threat." The officers exchanged a look, their faces unreadable. "We'll do our best, ma'am," the taller one said quietly. "But keep your distance, for everyone's sake." That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She stood by the window, gazing out at the moonlit trees. Noah cradled in her arms, his small breaths warm against her neck. Scout lay at her feet, ears flicking at every sound from outside. Emily's heart leapt as the familiar pale figure emerged from the shadows. Then, a flicker of movement. The she-wolf. She stood at the edge of the field, her slender grey body glowing under the moonlight, amber eyes fixed on Emily as if in silent communication. Emily pressed a hand to the glass, a lump rising in her throat. She knew this might be the last time. The she-wolf turned, pausing only a moment before slipping back into the dark. The wind stirred, carrying the faintest howl, low, mournful, a call from deep in the woods. The next morning, Emily made a decision. She strapped Noah into his carrier, pulled on her dark green coat, and called for Scout. Daniel watched her from the porch, his dark eyes wide with worry. "I just need to see," she said softly. "Just to understand." Emily. The forest was quiet. He hesitated, then nodded, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Be careful." Emily moved slowly, boots crunching on damp earth, Scout trailing close at her heels. The air smelled of pine and wet leaves, sunlight filtering through the canopy in shifting patterns. Near the tree line, she found them. The pack. The grey alpha stood at the front, his massive body poised, silver coat rippling as he raised his head. The she-wolf lingered just behind him, eyes soft, ears flicking forward. The other wolves watched in stillness, their breaths misting faintly in the cool air. Emily's heart thundered. "Thank you." She took a slow step forward, one hand resting over Noah's back, her voice barely a whisper. The grey alpha locked eyes with her, the moment stretching long and thin like a thread. Emily felt the tears slip down her cheeks. Then, slowly, he lowered his head, and in the next breath, the wolves turned. One by one, they vanished into the trees, like mist dissolving at dawn. Emily sat on the porch swing, rocking gently as the late afternoon sun dipped low, casting the fields in a warm golden light. Noah, now 4 months old, rested against her chest in the carrier, his soft baby breath rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Scout, their loyal border collie, lay stretched at her feet, his black and white coat shimmering in the light. It had been weeks since Emily last saw the wolves. Her honey blonde hair tied loosely at the nape of her neck, fluttered in the breeze. She wore a soft grey sweater, her fair skin catching the last blush of the sun, and her green eyes remained fixed on the tree line beyond the fields. The wildlife officers had come twice more, setting up trail cameras, leaving markers in the woods, warning neighbors to stay alert. Yet, Emily knew deep down, the wolves had moved on. The pack had given her a gift, and now they had slipped back into the wild where they belonged. Daniel stepped onto the porch, his dark brown hair tousled, sun-kissed skin flushed from the day's work. He handed her a mug of tea, settling beside her. "Still watching," he murmured, a small smile tugging at his mouth. Emily leaned into his shoulder, her voice soft. "It's strange. I miss them." Daniel kissed the top of her head. "You're not the only one." In town, the conversation had shifted. The sheriff confirmed no recent sightings. Farmers reported no missing livestock. The panic that had once rippled through Willow Creek was fading, replaced with cautious curiosity. At the general store, Mrs. Thompson handed Emily a small knitted cap for Noah, "For the miracle baby," she said, eyes misty. At the diner, a couple of ranchers nodded respectfully when Daniel walked in, their earlier suspicions softened by time. Yet not everyone was ready to let go of fear. Her heart clenched. Determined, Emily decided to help. Late one night, Emily overheard a conversation outside the post office. Two men murmuring about traps, about taking matters into their own hands if the wolves returned. Slowly, a small group of townspeople began to see the wolves, not as villains, but as part of the wild landscape they all shared. With Daniel's support, she began quietly speaking to neighbors, explaining what had happened, sharing her story not as a sensational miracle, but as a moment of connection between two worlds. She reminded them that the wolves hadn't attacked, hadn't lingered, hadn't caused harm. Emily also reached out to the wildlife officers, offering her help to educate the town and track the pack's movement. Emily wore a forest green jacket, jeans, and sturdy boots, her honey blonde hair pulled back, her fair skin flushed from the chill. Noah stayed home with her sister for the first time, and though Emily's arms felt strangely empty, her heart carried him with her. The taller officer, the one with sharp blue eyes, surprised her with a quiet nod. "We could use someone like you." One early morning, before sunrise, Emily and Daniel hiked out with the officers to check a trail camera deep in the woods. As they reached the camera, Emily knelt beside the officer, watching as he scrolled through the images. And there they were, 9 wolves, moving like shadows through the trees, the massive grey alpha, the slender she-wolf, the younglings darting like silver streaks between them. "Good," she whispered. "They're healthy," the officer murmured. "Strong. They've moved deeper north." Emily's heart lifted, even as her eyes brimmed with tears. That night, as Emily rocked Noah to sleep in his room, she hummed softly under her breath. And when she looked down at Noah, at his tiny fingers curled against her sweater, she smiled. She imagined the wolves running free under the moonlight, their paws kissing the earth, their breath curling into the night. She imagined them safe, wild, untouchable, because she knew the story wasn't over. The wolves would live on in Noah's life, in his childhood, in the lessons Emily would teach him about the world, about respect, about gratitude, about the wild beauty that had once saved them. As spring gave way to summer, the land bloomed with new life. Wildflowers dotted the meadows, the streams ran fast and clear, and the forest pulsed with quiet magic. Emily, Daniel, Noah, and Scout often walked to the edge of the woods at sunset. They'd stand together, watching the light fade, feeling the hush settle over the land. A song of survival. And sometimes, if Emily closed her eyes, she could almost hear it, the soft pad of paws on damp earth, the low melodic howl rising into the sky. A song of home. Summer settled over Willow Creek with a hush of warm winds and golden light. Emily walked down Main Street with Noah in the carrier, his tiny head nestled against her chest, his soft baby breath warm through the fabric. Her honey-blonde hair was pulled into a loose braid, her fair skin kissed pink by the summer sun. She wore a pale blue cotton blouse, comfortable jeans and walking sandals, her steps steady and calm. Flyers had gone up at the grocery store, the gas station, and the diner. Community discussion. Wildlife and safety. Town hall, 6 p.m. Daniel walked beside Emily, his dark brown hair neatly trimmed, sun-kissed skin tanned from long days in the fields. His steady hand rested on the small of her back. A quiet show of support. Scout trotted happily at their heels, tail wagging, black and white coat glossy in the evening light. The town had called a meeting. Inside, the building buzzed with low voices, folding chairs scraping against wooden floors, and the smell of coffee drifting from the back table. Emily felt the weight of eyes on her as they approached the town hall, curious, cautious. A few warm, a few wary. Sheriff Harris stood near the podium, his weathered face calm but watchful, arms folded over his chest. The wildlife officers were there too. The tall one with sharp blue eyes, the younger one with sandy hair, along with ranchers, farmers, teachers, and local shopkeepers. The sheriff cleared his throat, raising his hands for quiet. Emily found a seat near the front. Daniel beside her, Noah asleep in his carrier. Scout resting obediently at their feet. "Thank you all for coming," he said in his low, gravelly voice. "We are here to talk about the wolf pack near the outskirts and how we move forward as a community." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A young mother chimed in nervously, twisting her hands. "What about kids playing near the woods?" One rancher, burly, red-faced, arms crossed, spoke up sharply. "They've been seen near my cattle. I'm not waiting for them to take one of my calves." Emily rose slowly to her feet. The room quieted. With steady hands, she lifted Noah slightly, pressing a soft kiss to his head before speaking. "I understand the fear," Emily said, her voice gentle but clear. "But I've seen those wolves up close. I owe them my life. They protected me and my baby. They weren't looking for trouble. I'm not saying we don't need caution. I'm saying we need respect." She paused, her green eyes sweeping the room. For a long heartbeat, no one spoke. "She's right." Then Mrs. Thompson, the elderly shopkeeper, stood slowly, leaning on her cane. Her soft voice carried across the room. The murmurs shifted, the mood tilting. Emily exhaled slowly, her heart pounding with quiet relief. The sheriff cleared his throat again, glancing at the wildlife officers. "We'll keep monitoring. No traps, no hunting. Let's give this time." "You were brave tonight," he murmured. Emily smiled softly. "I just told the truth." That night, as they walked home under a silver-spilled sky, Emily felt Daniel's hand slip into hers. Scout trotted ahead, tail high, ears flicking toward the darkened tree line. Emily's eyes followed his gaze, lingering on the shadowed forest. At home, Emily rocked Noah by the window, his soft baby breath puffing against her collarbone. Daniel poured tea in the kitchen, Scout curling up by the door. She wondered, as they walked, if somewhere beyond those trees, the wolves still watched, silent guardians under the stars. Outside, the fields glowed pale under the moonlight, and beyond them the forest stirred with quiet life. "We'll always remember," she whispered. "The ones who saved us." Emily closed her eyes, pressing her cheek to Noah's soft hair. The tall wildlife officer arrived alone, his badge glinting in the sun, his blue eyes thoughtful. Emily greeted him on the porch, Noah cradled in her arms, Scout alert at her side. A few days later, Emily received a visit. We pulled the last trail cameras, the officer said quietly. The packs moved north, deeper into the forest. Is that good? She asked softly. Emily's chest tightened, part ache, part relief. The officer nodded. It's where they belong. As his truck rumbled away, Emily watched the horizon, the trees swaying gently in the summer breeze. The officer offered a small, tired smile. No, ma'am, thank you. Emily brushed her fingers over Noah's soft hair. Thank you for helping protect them. She sat under the old oak tree in their backyard, a quilt spread out over the grass, Noah tucked into her lap. His chubby legs kicked happily, his cheeks flushed pink in the golden light. Emily wore a pale yellow sundress, her fair skin glowing, honey blonde hair pulled back into a loose braid. Her green eyes sparkled as she smiled down at her son, brushing a fingertip over his tiny nose. The days stretched longer, the air warm and heavy with the scent of pine and wildflowers. Summer had reached its height, and Emily felt its softness in every breath. For the first time in months, her heart felt light. Nearby, Daniel hammered at a fence post along the pasture, his dark brown hair damp with sweat, sun-kissed skin glowing bronze under the sun. He glanced up often, his gaze softening each time he saw Emily and Noah, his heart full and quiet. Scout, their ever-watchful border collie, trotted circles around the yard, occasionally flopping onto the grass near Emily, tongue lolling from his mouth as he kept a casual eye on the family. It had been weeks since the last sighting of the wolves. That evening, after dinner, Emily stood by the back porch as the sun dipped below the hills, painting the sky in streaks of rose and lavender. Noah, now drowsy, was tucked snug in his carrier, his head resting against Emily's shoulder. Emily felt their absence, like a hollow space in her chest. Not sharp, not aching, but gently bittersweet. She knew this was how it should be. Wild things belonged in the wild. But part of her had hoped for one last glimpse, one last meeting, one last chance to say goodbye. Daniel came to stand beside her, wrapping an arm around her waist. You thinking about them again? He murmured. Emily nodded softly. I guess. I just wish I could thank them one last time. Scout perked up at the edge of the porch, ears flicking forward, nose twitching toward the tree line. Daniel kissed her temple. They know, Emily's breath caught. The massive grey alpha emerged, his silver-streaked coat catching the last rays of light, his amber eyes gleaming. Behind him, the slender she-wolf appeared, followed by the younger members of the pack. They stood at the edge of the clearing, silent, watchful. There, between the darkened trees, a shadow shifted. Emily's heart surged. Slowly she stepped down from the porch, Daniel close behind, one hand lightly on her back. Scout stayed at her heel, his tail wagging low, his posture calm and curious. Emily placed a hand over Noah's back, feeling his soft breath rise and fall, her own breath trembling in her chest. And then, slowly, deliberately, he dipped his head, an unmistakable gesture, quiet and reverent. The grey wolf lifted his head slightly, amber eyes locking with Emily's. Emily swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely a breath. The grey wolf held her gaze for a moment longer, then turned. One by one, the pack followed, slipping back into the shadows, their movements fluid and silent as water. Emily stood very still, her eyes shimmering with tears, Daniel's arms wrapping around her, anchoring her to the moment. That night, as the moon rose high and silver over the fields, Emily sat by the window in Noah's nursery, rocking slowly in the old wooden chair. Daniel kissed the top of her head. I think they did. It's like they knew, she murmured. Noah slept peacefully in his crib, Scout curled up at the foot of the bed, his chest rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. And then, drifting softly on the breeze, came a sound, low, melodic, unmistakable. Emily gazed out at the tree line, the dark silhouettes of the forest against the starlit sky. For a long time, she watched, listening to the hush of the night. A wolf's howl. It carried through the darkness like a song, A farewell, a promise. Emily closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek, a small, grateful smile touching her lips. By morning, the world felt different. "Goodbye," she whispered. "And thank you." Lighter, at peace. Scout barked once at the back door, wagging his tail as if sensing the shift. Emily rose with the sun, Noah babbling softly in his crib, Daniel's arms wrapping around her waist as they stood together in the soft golden light. Emily knew in her heart that the chapter with the wolves had closed, but the story itself would never end. In the hush of the forest, it would live on in the quiet moments, in the heartbeat of a little boy who would grow up knowing that sometimes the wild comes to save us. In the soft rustle of leaves, summer eased gently into early autumn, the days shortening, the nights carrying a faint, cool edge. Emily felt the shift in the air, smelled it in the sweet, dry scent of grass, heard it in the rustling of leaves that had begun to turn gold and crimson. Emily sat on the front porch, wrapped in a soft green sweater, jeans cuffed at her ankles, sandals tapping lightly on the wood, her green eyes lifted toward the horizon, where the forest line stood, steady and still in the fading light. Noah was 5 months old now, bright-eyed and curious. His fair skin glowed in the warm afternoon light as he reached for everything with chubby fingers. Emily's honey-blonde braid, the edge of his blanket, the cool nose of Scout, their ever-patient border collie, who let the baby tug his ears without complaint. She had not seen the wolves again. He called softly from the doorway. "There's a reporter here." But they were with her, in the silence, in the wind, in the quiet pulse of gratitude that still filled her chest. Inside the house, Daniel moved from room to room, fixing small repairs before winter. His dark brown hair was longer now, sun-kissed skin tanned from work, his sturdy hands fitting effortlessly into the rhythm of home. Emily's heart jumped slightly. She shifted Noah on her hip and stepped down from the porch. "Emily Carter?" she asked. "I'm from the Regional Wildlife Journal. I was hoping you might share your story." A young woman stood in the driveway, camera slung over one shoulder, notebook tucked under her arm. She had an eager, polite smile. Emily hesitated, then offered a gentle smile. "Come on up." She told the story, not as a tale of legend, but of survival, of connection, of gratitude. They sat on the porch steps as the sun lowered, Emily cradling Noah, Scout resting at her feet. Daniel brought out lemonade, then leaned on the railing, listening quietly as Emily spoke. She told of the she-wolf, gentle and careful, of the grey alpha, whose eyes had held something she could never explain. She told of the snowstorm, of the cold that had nearly stolen her life, of the moment she woke to find herself surrounded by wolves, their breath warm against her skin, their bodies shielding her from the deadly wind. And she told of the rescue, the town's fear, the goodbye in the fields. When she finished, the reporter's eyes were bright, her pen resting still on her notepad. Emily smiled, pressing a kiss to Noah's soft hair. "That's not the point," she murmured. "The point is, we were saved by the wild, and we owe them respect. Do you think people will believe you?" she asked softly. The town buzzed for a few days, then settled, but Emily felt a shift, a new energy pulling at her, a sense that her journey with the wolves had left her with more than memories. Saved by the wild, the woman who lived because the wolves stayed. The article appeared 2 weeks later. It had left her with a purpose. Autumn deepened. Emily began working quietly with the wildlife officers, helping educate the town, visiting schools, answering questions. She stood before classrooms of wide-eyed children, her fair skin glowing with quiet passion, her honey-blonde hair pulled back neatly. Noah often nestled in a carrier at her chest. She spoke of the balance between humans and nature, the importance of coexistence, the miracle that comes when we stop fearing what we don't understand. Daniel watched her with quiet pride, sometimes waiting at the back of the room. Scout curled at his feet. One afternoon, as Emily packed up after a school talk, Sheriff Harris approached her. Emily smiled softly. Thank you, Sheriff. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. You know, I used to be one of the ones worried, thought we needed to drive those wolves out. Emily, he said gruffly, shifting on his feet, you've made this town proud. Emily's green eyes softened. And now, he chuckled, now, I'm just glad we let them be. That evening, Emily and Daniel walked together through the fields, Noah giggling from his carrier, Scout bounding ahead. Emily tilted her head, listening, and just for a moment, so faint it might have been the wind, she thought she heard it. The sun painted the sky in a blaze of orange and gold, the air crisp with the scent of leaves and earth, the distant howl, a farewell, a blessing, a thread between worlds unbroken. Emily smiled, her heart full. They walked on, into the soft light, into the life they were building, into the story that would never truly end. The first frost arrived one night without warning. Emily awoke to the window pane laced in delicate silver. The grass outside tipped in white. She stood at the window, fair-skinned and wrapped in a thick robe, honey-blonde hair tousled over her shoulders. She gazed out at the sleeping fields, the forest edge dark and still under the pale light of dawn. Noah stirred in his crib, making soft little noises. Emily turned, smiling gently, and lifted him into her arms, cradling his warm, wriggling body against her chest. In the doorway, Daniel leaned, dark brown hair rumpled, sun-kissed skin glowing faintly in the morning light. First frost, he murmured. Emily kissed Noah's forehead. Winter's coming. But with winter came something Emily had feared. That afternoon, the sheriff arrived. We've got a problem, Sheriff Harris said softly. He stood on their porch, weathered face lined with unease, hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. Emily, dressed in a dark grey sweater and jeans, Noah on her hip, opened the door, heart sinking at the look in his eyes. Daniel stepped beside Emily, folding his arms. What kind of problem? The sheriff sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. A group of ranchers, 3, maybe 4, are planning to set traps. They're scared the wolves will come back with the cold. Emily felt her stomach knot. You said you'd protect them. I'm trying, Harris said wearily. But I can't be everywhere. Emily exchanged a glance with Daniel, her pulse quickening. We have to do something, she whispered. I want to go into the woods, Emily said quietly. I want to warn them. That evening, Emily stood in the kitchen, arms folded, green eyes dark with a determination. Daniel leaned against the counter, Scout pacing at his feet. Daniel looked at her in alarm. Emily. No. Emily softened, glancing toward the baby monitor. I'll go in the early morning. You stay with him. Daniel ran a hand through his dark hair, exhaling sharply. What about Noah? They saved us, Emily said, voice steady. I can't just stand here and let them walk into a death trap. Before dawn, Emily pulled on her dark green winter coat, wool hat, scarf, gloves, and boots. Her fair skin flushed from the cold, her honey-blonde hair tucked under the hat. She kissed Daniel and Noah softly, whispered a promise to be careful, and slipped outside. Scout followed at her heel, paws crunching over frost-laced grass as they crossed the fields toward the trees. Daniel stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head with a faint, rueful smile. I married the bravest woman alive. Scout paused suddenly, ears pricked, nose lifted to the wind. The forest was silent, heavy, with the stillness of coming snow. Emily moved carefully, calling softly under her breath. I don't know if you can hear me, she murmured, but you need to stay away. The grey alpha came first, silver coat gleaming faintly, amber eyes watchful and calm. The she-wolf followed, her pale grey fur rippling like moonlight. The younger wolves lingered behind, curious and quiet. Emily froze. From the trees, the wolves emerged. She crouched slightly, breath fogging in the cold. There's danger, she whispered. Traps. Men, you need to go deeper. Go north. The grey alpha watched her, unmoving. Emily's heart surged with relief and fear. For a long moment, no one moved. Emily pressed a gloved hand to her chest, voice trembling. Please. Then, slowly, the grey wolf dipped his head, just as he had that night in the field. Emily let out a shaky breath, sinking to her knees. Scout nuzzled her side, tail wagging softly. The she-wolf turned first, slipping into the shadows. The young wolves followed. And finally, the grey alpha gave one last look, steady, thoughtful, fierce, and vanished into the dark. Goodbye, she whispered. By the time the ranchers came, the wolves were long gone. Emily smiled, tears blurring her vision. I don't know what you did, Harris murmured, but they've moved on. And when the sheriff stood in Emily's kitchen later that day, his eyes crinkled with quiet amazement. Emily simply smiled, rocking Noah in her arms. I don't know what you did, Harris murmured, but they've moved on. And when the sheriff stood in Emily's kitchen later that day, his eyes crinkled with quiet amazement. Emily simply smiled, rocking Noah in her arms. Outside, the world was hushed, white, waiting. Daniel wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. Noah slept peacefully in his crib, Scout curled at the foot of the bed. That night, as snow began to fall softly over the land, Emily stood at the window, watching the flakes drift through the glow of the porch light. Safe, Emily laid her hand on the glass, her breath misting the window. And somewhere, far in the northern woods, she knew the wolves were running wild and free,